Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my name is Dominic and I'd like to welcome you all to another episode of Spotlight Game of Thrones, the series in which we take a look at some of the characters who feature in the A Song of Ice and Fire novels but are yet to be seen on the hit HBO show. So, if you love Game of Thrones and want to know more about the world and its characters outside of the TV show, you've come to the right place. In today's episode we'll be continuing our look at the Targaryen dynasty. Last time we examined the very first Targaryen king of Westeros, Aegon Targaryen, also known as Aegon the Conqueror. This time around we'll be taking a look at his firstborn son and successor, Aenys Targaryen, first of his name. Now, when we last left off, Aegon Targaryen had died at Dragonstone at the age of 64, whilst regaling his grandchildren with stories of his conquests. Upon learning of his father's death, Aenys, who was at Highgarden at the time, proceeded to promptly mount his dragon, who was called Quicksilver, and return to King's Landing to receive his crown. He was crowned in a lavish ceremony in the Red Keep, which at the time was still under construction, in the year 37 AC, which stands for After Conquest. Where his father Aegon had worn a simple circlet of Valyrian steel as his crown, Aenys instead donned an ornate golden crown to sit atop his head. Now you may think that seeing as the Targaryens had dragons, nobody in their right mind would mess with them, regardless of who sat the Iron Throne, but that was far from the case, as Aenys came to prove. It took much more than superior firepower to maintain a peaceful kingdom. Before we get into Aenys' reign, let's quickly take a brief look at his early years. Now, if you remember from last week, Aegon the Conqueror had two wives, both of whom were his sisters. One was Visenya, a strong yet hard woman whom Aegon married out of obligation, and the other was Rhaenys, a kind-hearted free spirit whom Aegon married out of love. Aenys was the son of Rhaenys, and in many ways he came to resemble his mother, especially in his character. Aegon would also have a son with his wife Visenya, a child called Maegor, who too resembled his own mother, but we'll get to him soon enough. Now, when Aenys was born, he was a frail and sickly child, and remained that way much throughout his childhood. So weak he was in fact that rumours began to spread around court that he could be no true son of Aegon the Conqueror, and that he must be the child of one of the many handsome singers and mummers whom Rhaenys was known to spend much of her time with. However, these rumours soon subsided when Aenys was given the dragon hatchling Quicksilver, and as the dragon grew, so too did the young prince. As he grew into adulthood, however, Aenys continued to resemble his mother in ways deemed unfit for a king. Whereas his younger brother Maegor was an accomplished warrior, Aenys remained a dreamer and a patron of the arts. But it was his indecisiveness and penchant to hesitate over decisions for fear of being disliked that would prove to be his fatal flaw. You see, although Aenys' father had indeed united the kingdoms of Westeros, bar Dorne of course, there was still a great deal of resentment and ill will held towards the Targaryen family. There were some who wanted vengeance against them for relatives that had been lost during the wars of conquest. There were some who missed the old days when each ruled their own domain with absolute authority. And then there were those who simply didn't like the idea of serving under an incestuous monarchy and thought the whole thing to be, quite frankly, kinda gross. These rumblings were held at bay during the reign of Aegon, as not only were he and his sisters strong and swift to act at the slightest sniff of dissent within their kingdom, but they were also careful not to entirely alienate the institutions within Westeros that may have the power to topple their rule. It was no coincidence that Aegon converted to the faith of the Seven before he began his campaign, and that he paid a great respect to the High Septon while he ruled. He also opted to respect the local laws of each region and left them pretty much intact. It would be left to the rule of another king to bring the laws of Westeros under one unified code of law. All of these things exhibited wisdom on the part of his father that sadly Aenys would never be able to fully grasp. The first uprising would occur when a bandit who called himself Harren the Red took the castle of Harrenhal from Lord Gargon and castrated the lord in the castle's godswood, leaving him to bleed to death. All of this happened while King Aenys guested at Riverrun with Lord Tully, but by the time Aenys had decided to deal with the threat, Harren the Red had abandoned the castle and returned to banditry. Another instance occurred when Jonas Arryn imprisoned his own brother Lord Ronald Arryn in the Eyrie. Aenys did at first command that a host of ships sail for the Vale to deal with this new threat, but then recalled the order after fearing that Harren the Red might try to infiltrate King's Landing. This left it for others to simply act where the king would not, and Lord Royce of Runestone gathered a host to sweep away the usurpers. However, this led to the death of the Lord, as Ronald was flung from the Moondoor by his brother. It was Aenys' younger brother Maegor who took it upon himself to mount Balerion, the huge dragon known as the Black Dread that he had inherited from his father, and fly to the Eyrie where he hung Jonas and his followers. The pattern of Aenys' incompetence leading to others rising to the occasion continued. The king inadvertently gave the Iron Islands the power to oust the Faith of the Seven from their lands, and it took the might of the former Hand Orys Baratheon, the Marcher Lords, and his current Hand Lord Alan Stokeworth to deal with all of the other incursions, from a man who called himself the Vulture King to Harren the Red himself. When Lord Alan died in helping to defeat Harren the Red, King Aenys, thinking he owed a great debt to those who had aided him, made his brother Maegor the new Hand of the King, a decision that he would come to bitterly regret. You see, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of people were unhappy with the fact that the Targaryens wed within the family, as the practice of incest was deemed abominable by the Faith of the Seven, and even though they abided this on the part of Aegon the Conqueror, when the tradition looked set to continue, hostilities between the Targaryens and the Faith seemed inevitable. King Aenys himself was deemed okay, as he married Lady Alyssa Velaryon, who was only a cousin to the king, being Targaryen on her mother's side. It was when Visenya proposed that Aenys' brother Maegor be wed to his firstborn Rhaenys that trouble started. Maegor was eventually made to marry the High Septon's own niece, but as the marriage proved barren and Aenys himself continued to bear children and heirs in Aegon, Viserys, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, Maegor took a second wife in secret. The outcry led to Aenys exiling his brother in a lame attempt to appease the Faith. However, Aenys made matters worse when he decided to wed his eldest daughter Rhaena to his son and heir Aegon. This resulted in the Faith taking up arms against the crown and fortifying the Hill of Rhaenys, turning the Sept of Remembrance into a citadel that could stand against the king. Men even snuck into the castle and attempted to kill the king and his family, and may have succeeded were it not for a Knight of the Kingsguard. In the face of all this hostility, Aenys fled to Dragonstone. There, Visenya counselled him to bring fire and blood to the Faith, but unable to make a decision, the king instead fell ill with painful cramps, a retching stomach and loose bowels. Although he was only 35, it was said that King Aenys had the appearance of a 60-year-old man. Not long after, he died in the care of the Dowager Queen Visenya. Some say that it was stress that took Aenys' life, while others claim that Visenya, who had long wanted her son Maegor to seize power of the throne, had something to do with it. What is known is that after the king's death, Visenya flew to Pentos in order to recall her son Maegor from exile and place him on the Iron Throne, despite the fact that Aenys' own son Aegon was the rightful king and heir. The rule of King Maegor Targaryen would come to be known as the most brutal and bloody in the history of Westeros, but that is a story for next week. Thank you all for watching this second episode in the second season of Spotlight Game of Thrones. You can check out the entire first season on the channel, as well as a whole bunch of other A Song of Ice and Fire and nerd related content. Please hit that like button down below if you enjoyed the video, as it really does help me out, and consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you again next week.